and I heard his body hit the floor. I gave him CPR for 45 minutes. They couldn't find our building. We were right across the street from Kimbrough Army Hospital. They'd taken both our buildings off the map completely as part of the security.
Welcome, friends, to Terraverse TV. My name is John Altarelli, and I will be your host today. If you are curious to learn from some of the world's most renowned experts, then subscribe to Terraverse TV. We will do our best to provide you with educational and entertaining content on noteworthy topics. We have an extensive network of brilliant people who are willing to share their insights with you. If you like this content, please hit the subscribe and like buttons, and send your comments and suggestions so we can continuously improve on the topics and guests. Also, turn on the notifications bell to receive updates on future shows. I also host a Terraverse Salon, which is an in-person gathering of intellectually curious folks from all walks of life. We invite experts to discuss interesting topics and allow the guests to participate in a live Q&A after. The salon was so successful that we no longer can accommodate the number of guests who wish to attend in person, so we recently started filming the salons and we'll be posting them on Terraverse TV as well. We hope you enjoy the videos from the salons. Finally, if you're interested in the backstory on Terraverse TV and Terraverse Salon and some of the background on me and my co-hosts, we will post some additional content for your viewing pleasure. Today, we have the honor of interviewing Mr. Joe McMoneagle. Joe is a retired U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer. He was involved in the remote viewing operations and experiments conducted by U.S. Army Intelligence and the Stanford Research Institute. He was among the first personnel recruited for the classified program now known as the Stargate Project, which ran from 1978 to 1995. Along with colleague Ingo Swann, McMoneagle is best known for claims surrounding the investigation of remote viewing and the use of paranormal abilities for military intelligence gathering. His interests also include near-death experiences, out-of-body travel, and unidentified flying objects. I want to thank Joe for taking the time to talk with us about his experiences with remote viewing. I've listened to his recent interview on Sean Ryan's podcast and read some of his published materials like Remote Viewing Secrets. Today, we're going to take this time to drill down on the mechanics of remote viewing and to get a better understanding from Joe on the phenomena. I hope you enjoy this interview. Hey, good morning, Joe. Thanks for taking the time to share your experiences with us. I recently saw you on Sean Ryan's podcast. That was quite an experience, and I'm not going to try to cover all the ground that Sean did. It was a long interview, and I'm going to encourage our viewers to pick up on that podcast. We'll put a link in the down below so you guys can look at that. I think you'll find that to be even more interesting than what we might cover today. Today we're going to take some time drilling down onto the mechanics of remote viewing, which is what you're here for, obviously, and we're going to get a better understanding from you about the phenomena. And I'm going to just ask some questions. I'm going to let you be the star of the show and tell us what's your views on these things. So the first thing is, let's start with, what is remote viewing?
Remote viewing is basically the ability to report on data that's inaccessible to a human being. In other words, it can be an event, place, a person, something that's going on, almost anything. Regardless of distance, regardless of time, you can actually target those things with the mind and produce information. The mistaken belief about remote viewing, it's all over the internet, is it's about people being able to draw exactly what the target is. And I will tell you, that's extremely rare. It takes years, literally decades, to get to that point. But the typical remote viewer who does a really good job can produce bits and pieces of data about something that's important. Usually it's whatever the intent to collect gets them to. So the intent, the attention to the details of the protocol, and the expectation for outcome is generally what produces the result that's of value.
Is this something that people are born with, Joe, or is it something that can be trained?
Actually, both. It can be trained to a certain degree. The problem is the investment of time that someone then has to make by practicing it to a point where they've been able to undo all the types of analysis and assumptions and things that we're born with, that we learn over time. You have to kind of undo all that and then redo the way you process information. And once you've processed the information to in a more effective way, you can then interpret what the subconscious is producing for you, what it's giving you. An example would be if someone gets the image of a swimming pool. It's not a swimming pool. It's the subconscious using something relatively the same to provide information. The subconscious has no language of its own. So what it does is it borrows from the conscious mind. It'll give you the image of the swimming pool. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a swimming pool. What it means, actually, if you start analyzing that, is that it's some kind of a place that looks like a swimming pool that holds liquid of some kind, and we don't really know what the function is. So you have to ask yourself, well, would I swim in it? And if your mind says, oh, no, you don't want to be swimming in this. Okay, should I taste it? No, never put it in your mouth. There's a foul odor to it and whatnot. You're getting closer to the fact that it may be a sewage processing plant. You understand what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
So the subconscious borrows what it can from the normal memories and things of a human being, and it gives you things that are somewhat similar or alike. So you have to break that down in sort of a reverse analysis way, and that gives you the information that you need. But it's always bits and pieces. It's not about putting it all together and saying it's a sewage processing plant. No, it's the bits and pieces. If you're looking for, let's say, a location where a hostage might be held, and the person's saying right in front of the building he's being held is this like swimming pool, and you find out it's more of a sewage processing plant, that gives you a location, and you may have the person who's actually looking for the missing person might actually have a choice of 5 or 6 locations that they are assuming they might be held in. One of those might be next to a sewage processing plant. So it gives you information that it's of value in terms of where you want to look first.
So it doesn't have to be exact. It's in some extent, to the extent you're eliminating places that don't have
Right.
a particular feature that you're seeing, right?
Yeah. I give you a really good example. In one of the hostage cases that we worked on, one of our remote viewers, a guy named Hartley Trent, he's dead now, but back then he was like one of the best remote viewers we had. He's even better than I was in many cases. And what he did is he came in, and they knew that the hostage was being held in an apartment building, but it was a big building, and it had 2 or 3 entrances to it, and they didn't know which entrance to go in with the team. So rather than make a mistake and give the hostage holders time to possibly eliminate him or hurt him, they needed to know what entry was closest to the target room, or the easiest one to get to the target room with. So what they did is they asked us to provide that information. Well, it's very hard to do because all the entrances looked alike. So Hartley came in that morning and he said, for some reason, all I've been doing all night is smelling roses. I don't know what that means. Well, it turns out there was a rose garden in front of the one entry that some resident of that apartment building had put in. So that's the entry they used. Might have made all the difference in the world in terms of how much time it took to get to the hostage. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Okay. And we're going to be talking about some specific missions and examples of what you've done in the past. But before we get into that, I'd like to sort of help our viewers understand a little bit of what the science is behind this, because I think a lot of people who are unaware of it or who have heard about it, it's been sort of vilified, over the years as sort of pseudoscience, and it's probably not given the recognition it's due, although I know there's been a lot of studies done, Stanford and other places, It's been looked at by serious, academics and scientists. There've been multiple tests where they've actually tried to verify, see what the probabilities and all that. And I've read some that were absolutely supportive of the science. And then, of course, not surprising, particularly in today's world, where you find one scientist says A, the other scientist says no, A is not true. And there's an agenda behind that. So for the average person, we have a hard time trying to figure out who's telling the truth.
No, I understand that.
And that's probably been the bane of your existence for your entire career, because you haven't had enough maybe people supporting. Well, we'll get into that.
Well,
Let's talk about the science.
The way I'm going to respond to you, John, is no, it's there. The science is there. There's 1.8 million words of science. It's in 4 volumes. They're all over 600 pages, double columns both sides, tissue-thin paper. It's got every result that was ever done in a lab for remote viewing. In the case of, let's say, local sidereal time as an example, where we were looking at, is remote viewing more accurate at certain times and not? In fact, that study used over 100,000 remote viewings. So this is a ridiculous statement to say there's no science backing this up. There's more science backing up remote viewing than the reason people take aspirin to prevent heart attack. And you got to look at that. Okay, let's look at the two and compare them as an example. We all take an aspirin to prevent heart attack. There's a number of studies that back each other up. If I told you that all those studies were performed by pharmaceutical companies who make and sell aspirin, would that have an effect on those studies? I think so.
Sure.
Okay. Well, in this case, with remote viewing, we had millions of dollars were spent. It sounds like a lot of money, but this is over a 23-year period.
And a long time ago.
Yeah, maybe $18 million. I mean, that's nothing. That's chicken feed. We spent all that money, but it wasn't all spent in one lab. It was spent in 10, 12, 15 labs, depending on what we were looking at. They farmed money out to other labs to duplicate and replicate what was going on at Stanford. So it's not like it came out of just one lab. It came out of labs that were overseas in the UK. It came out of labs that were located in multiple locations. And all of those labs had the same exact results, following the same protocol that was developed by Stanford in 1972. So, and that protocol hasn't changed, by the way. When you do remote viewing, the only way you can do it is if everybody in the room or everybody associated with a target is totally blind to it. That means you don't know what it is. You don't know what you're working on. There's no hints. There's no GPS location. In fact, when we started, we used GPS locations. We did away with that because the CIA said, oh, we think this guy might have an eidetic memory and he's memorized all the important GPS locations. Well, first off, that's an impossibility, or very borders an impossibility. So what we did is we said, oh, okay, just put it in a double-wrapped opaque envelope, which they did, and the results are the same. We even had a case where an agent came in one morning and said, oh my goodness, I left the target that I wanted you to work next on my desk in Langley. So we said, okay, target I left on my desk today at this time in Langley, put that in a double wrap opaque envelope, and guess what? Got the answer anyway. So it's ridiculous to think that there's some kind of foolery going on. Now, this has to do with the human mind. It has to do with what you intend to do, what you pay attention to, and what your expectation for outcome is. And there's a whole lot of science behind that says humans don't live in the moment. We live in a period of time. And that we don't know how great that is, but some people have a period of time they occupy, which may be half a day or a whole day or a week. We don't know. But that information that you're going to have, let's say in a week's time, is actually looping back to you. So you're picking up on everything in that process of time that you're going to participate in. But we don't participate in the moment. We participate in a length of time. We don't understand how that works yet, but we do know that that's probably what's happening.
That's something to get your arms around. So I
Yeah,
mean,
it is. But the problem here is people say, oh, well, it's a pseudoscience. There's nothing backing this up. Well, those are people saying that have never looked at the science. I mean, there's that much print on the science. And if you say, did you read about it? What specifically are you talking about? They can't give you an answer. They're just reacting out of some emotional BS.
well, we're seeing a lot of that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm having this conversation, is because part of my dilemma is, as a lawyer, I spend a lot of time doing
I
diligence,
understand.
trying to find the truth, trying to find the original sources. And that is actually easier, strangely enough, in the finance world, when you would think the obfuscation would be the greatest.
Yeah,
Than
where
it
you're
is
not
sometimes in the
fighting everything from religion, beliefs, to how people would like to see it function, because that doesn't disturb their particular world, how they're operating.
And
Okay,
it can't help that this was something that the government loves
right?
and doesn't want anyone
Yeah,
else to know about, right? So your own sort of masters, if you will, are well known for obfuscating the truth and making believe that what they have they don't have.
Well,
So
think of it this way: there's no defense.
yeah, I
What are
get
you
that.
going to do?
Joe, why don't we start with you giving us a little history on the Stargate, what became Stargate?
Okay, actually, the program called Stargate, when it started, was called Gondola Wish. That was the idea behind it. It was kept classified because we weren't sure if the work that the Russians and the Chinese and others that were using psychics was actually a threat or not. So when the military decided to address it as a threat, what we usually do is we consolidate our materials. We bring people in that we think can mimic or do what the enemy's doing, and then we try to simulate the same things, like targeting ourselves. And then we collect a certain amount of information. And once we use those methods to collect information, we turn it over to an independent agency, an agency that has no dog in the race, okay? And they assess the materials and come back and say, this is how much it worked, this is how much it failed, this is how important the results were, and whether or not it's a true threat. Now, in the case of Gondola Wish, when they started that process, it became known as Grill Flame. That was the new project name. Under Grill Flame, they started putting it together. The problem was when they started doing tests on the protocol that was developed by Stanford, we were getting such superior results that everybody found out about it in the intelligence world, and we started getting tasking right away. These are problems we can't deal with. You got to help us. So we started answering those problems. We had in those days we had a thing called a blue book. It was filled with examples. People started seeing those things happening, and we were overwhelmed by different intelligence agencies asking for assistance and help on some problems that they couldn't get answers to. I remember the first thing that happened was there was a missing Soviet bomber at the time. And of course it was, who knows what it was carrying, but it disappeared over Africa, Zaire, I think, Central Africa, the Congo. And nobody could find it. They looked for this plane for years and couldn't find it. And everybody was looking for this plane. Terrorist organizations, everyone. We went to the 3 people that were possibly going to be participants in our program, and all 3 people put a little circle on maps. One was in Wright-Patterson Air Base when they did it. The other was at Fort Meade, and the other person was overseas, or I think California maybe. But they were all in 3 different locations. They didn't even know each other. All the circles intersected. So they inserted a team in that location, and the first thing they started bumping into were natives carrying parts of the plane down the pathways to patch their roofs and their huts. So we found the plane. President Carter at the time gave a briefing on how we had finally located the plane. recovered all the things of importance, and turned them all back over to Russia. And in that briefing, one of the reporters said, "So how did you find the plane? Everybody was looking for it." And he said, "Oh, we found the plane in about 4 hours using our psychics." Well, as soon as he said that, he was holding in his arm a folder. It was a green folder with a red stripe. It said Grill Flame on it. So, project name was changed from Grill Flame to Center Lane, and we all got moved. I mean, everything changed. We then became a little bit more clandestine, buried a little bit deeper, but the amount of targeting that went up. And the problem we had then is we had to start answering to a lot of oversight committees. We had 5 different oversight committees at the time. We had a science oversight committee, a human use oversight committee. We had more oversight from Congress than any other project in history. And they all had red card permit. They could walk in, and if they saw anything they didn't like, they could stop us. Not one time in 23 years did that happen. Not one single time. We had Nobel laureates on those oversight committees. So that ties into the science of it. It's like when I hear people say, "Oh no, this isn't real, it's a pseudoscience," they're talking through their hats. They don't have a clue. They don't have anything to understand that. Eventually, by changing the managerial authority over the project, it would change names every time. In the very end, the CIA was ordered by Congress to take full charge of it, turn it totally black, bury it as deep as they could so nobody knew about it. They said no. And the reason they said no is because you, Congress, have dragged us over the coals over MK Ultra, which was a project using LSD or something for interrogation purposes. You drag us over the coal for 5 years over that. Why would we take this project? And the Congress said, "Hey, you work for us, we don't work for you. You will take this project." So they did. They took the project, they did a review, they took all the positive results, cut them out of the report, and shut the project down. That way nobody's hurt by it, okay? So that's the last name that it had was Stargate under the CIA. Now, the 100 and so banker boxes full of materials and everything that project did are sitting in Langley. And in those boxes, a couple of those boxes were open by some naval personnel who got access to them years after that we shut down. And not a single seal in any of those boxes was ever cracked or broken. They didn't review anything. They reviewed 10 files, hand-selected by the CIA to determine the outcome of the study. Now, going back to the science, 23 years of science, supporting everything about it. And yeah, it didn't work all the time. There's a lot of things you could say about it. But to say there's nothing backing it up, or it's some kind of a pseudo thing, is a total mischaracterization of the entire thing. Now, there are 6 original viewers that we used. Out of those, there's 2 survivors. The ones who didn't survive died because of results from Agent Orange to you name it. They were all military. Some of them had massive coronaries while they were doing the remote viewing. The reason why is the stress. They were supporting 12 to 15 agencies across the board. 5 or 6 remote viewings a day. That's outrageous. 2 survivors today, and I think well, anyway, that's kind of the story.
I've heard that you were the first sort of, number one for remote viewing. That was the first guys. That's
Yeah.
Okay. So how did they recruit you? I assume it's not something that was an MOS that you could volunteer for back in the day.
In actuality, I'd been overseas for a long time. They brought me back to the headquarters eventually, and the general actually made me a Chief Warrant Officer. I wasn't boarded for it. It just happened. What he wanted is I had so much overseas experience, he wanted me running my MLS for the world, which I did. I gladly took that job. I really liked it a lot. At the same time, he asked me to watch his backside on a lot of things that were going on because I had a good background in technology, that sort of thing. And when it came up that they wanted to start looking at this stuff, this psychic functioning stuff, he called me into his office and he said, "This is General Roya." He said, "I want you to go to Fort Meade. I want you to check this stuff out. Come back and tell me what you think." So I went over there and I spent all day going through a pile of stuff on a desk, some from China, some from Russia, a lot of stuff from American newspapers. And I have to say, 80% of the stuff on the table was crap, okay?
Intel, supposedly Intel?
No, most of it wasn't.
Okay.
Most of it was just psychic information.
Okay.
Okay, books that people wrote, pamphlets.
Okay.
You know, that kind of stuff.
All right.
So I reviewed the materials, and I spent the whole day doing it. And at the end, the officer who was in charge at the time, it was Major Watt, asked me, he said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "What do you mean, what do I think? Most of this is crap." And he said, "But is there a threat there?" And I said, "Yes, I think there's a threat here. And it's predominantly coming out of Russia and China." And it's, "Thank you very much," I left. I went back to the headquarters. Now, the general called me in a little while later and he said, I want you to go out to Stanford Research Institute. They want you to come out there. They want to show you what remote viewing is and everything. I need somebody to watch my back, Joe. So I want you to go out there and see what it's all about." So I went out to California. When I got there, I started asking questions about the remote viewing. And they said, "Well, the best way to understand it is to do it." So I said, "I don't understand." Right there. He said, "Well, we have a person we'll send somewhere, and we would like you to describe where that person went." And the way they did that is the guy would use a random generator to pull an envelope out of a safe and disappear. At a specific time that morning, he would open the envelope and drive to that location. In the meantime, I would go to a windowless room on the third floor and describe where he was. So I'm in the windowless room with one of the researchers, and he said, "Okay, describe where this person is." And he showed me a picture. And I said, "Okay, how do I do that?" And he said, "Just whatever comes in your mind." So I said, "Oh, okay, they want me to invent stuff, right?" So I sat there a minute, and what popped in my mind, I drew. I did 6 of those over a week's period. 5 of them were first place matches. They were almost perfect drawings of where the guy was.
So you did 6 different people over a week's time.
Right.
Each is separate.
And the way they judge them, what they do is they have an analyst who sits there and looks at your drawings, and he's provided with 6 pictures of 6 different locations. And they have to take your drawings and decide which one the person went to.
Okay, so you did the location.
Yes. So the location was decided correctly 5 out of 6 times. The 6th time, it was a second place. So it was very close to first place. They've never had a reaction that good. I got back to the headquarters, and I went in my office, and my desk was empty. And I went down and saw the general, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I need somebody in this project to watch my 6, to take care of anything that might go hinky. I want to know about it. So I want you to go to Fort Meade and be a part of this project." And I went, "Oh, please don't do this to me, General." Because I could see the handwriting on the wall. This is a career killer, okay? "No, I'm afraid I have to order you to go to Fort Meade." Well, I'm a good soldier. I went to Fort Meade. I got recruited. I was remote viewer 001. I was first guy. Second guy, they started to give him 002, and they realized they'd be telling people how many viewers they had. So you got 385. That's the only reason.
Like
Okay.
some random numbers.
Right.
That makes sense. All right, so I've heard the name Hal Puthoff.
Right.
Who is he? What's his
Hal
relationship?
Puthoff was the chief scientist in charge of the remote viewing experimentation lab. Now, the lab was actually located in the radiophysics lab at SRI. And so he and a man named Russell Targ were the original researchers. They brought in Dr. May, I think, about 1975. And Dr. May joined them as also a researcher. Dr. May is a physicist, as Hal Puthoff is. Russell Targ does a lot of work in physics, but I don't believe he had his doctorate at it. But it doesn't matter. The three of them operated as a unit in doing the research. In 1978, October 78, is when I was actually recruited by the Army and the project in the Army started. Now, the project in the Army was all about collection, collecting intelligence. It had nothing at all to do with research. SRI provided the research arm for the Army. The problems came in when the original 6 viewers had started falling away because of medical reasons, death, that sort of thing.
Premature death, or what seems kind of weird.
One of the men was in his early 30s. He just got married. He had a kid on the way. He walked in my office one morning and dropped dead right in front of me. I gave him CPR for 45 minutes. When he came in, I said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be working in New York this morning. He said, I don't know. I don't feel right. Something's wrong. He gave me his briefcase. I put it under my desk. I went in to get him some coffee, and I heard his body hit the floor. I gave him CPR for 45 minutes. They couldn't find our building. We were right across the street from Kimbrough Army Hospital, and the ambulance came out, kept going up and down the road. They'd taken both our buildings off the map completely as part of the security protection we had. He died in my office. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about here.
You think that, what was the connection between stress from the remote view?
Mm-hmm. Now, I can speak from experience. Yeah. I was the last viewer for the last 2 years in the original 6. They brought in people to replace me, but they did not recruit them the same way by looking at their history, seeing if there's any kind of psychic functioning going on there. What they did is they went out and brought people in according to the commanding general at the time. His name was Bert Stubblebine. He recruited people because they came up to him and said, I'm a great psychic, you need to take me. Okay, so he brought them in. And the idea was, can we train these people? So Ingo Swann, who was a psychic at Stanford, developed what he called a training mechanism. So they applied that on the new members that were brought in.
But what about you? You were already past that stage?
I was totally trained in the Ingo Swann method myself.
Yourself first?
At SRI. Now, I'll tell you a secret. Every viewer we had at SRI in the lab was trained by Ingo Swann. None of them used his methodology. None. To include Ingo Swann. And the reason why is because the training method was it was done in stages. Okay. 6 stages. It took, I don't know, somewhere between 18 months and 2 years to finish all 6 stages.
It's quite intensive.
Yes. One man finished all 6. The other people finished the first 3. At some point in there, they expected the one man to at least become operational to replace me because I was getting close to retirement. I had been the only viewer for 20 months. He came into work with a medical problem. He had developed a heart murmur. So the boss said, you just finished your training and you got a heart murmur suddenly. Why? And he said, I don't know. He said, take a week's leave, go home, be with your family, and decide if you really want to be part of this this project. Well, he went home, he spent 4 days there, he came back and said, I quit. So they reassigned him. This is a guy who finished six segments of training with Ingo Swann, took 18 months and he quit because of the heart murmur in his discussion with his wife. I think there was some religious problems there as well, but whatever. I was not replaced by the time I left. They did everything in the world to try to keep me there, and I said, no, here's the reason why. All that science was being brought to our collection office in packets. They were classified. They were being delivered with, registered mail. Excuse me, I get dry mouth when I talk too much. Those packets are still sealed in the boxes in Langley. They were never opened in the project, and here's the reason why. Collection is different than science. And I argued the point that no, science improves collection. So when I retired, I went straight to SRI and got hired because I wanted to become a better remote viewer. The people in the project refused to change how they were doing their remote viewing, how they were performing. The reason being that they felt that the science protocols were getting too difficult. I honestly can't tell you why they wouldn't do it, but they never opened those packets. They never looked at what science was showing them about remote viewing. I suspect, I really don't want to go there because I don't want to make accusations I can't back up. The point I'm trying to make is, by going to SRI and being hired at SRI as a remote viewer, they continued to use me both for collection as well as in the science area to like a white rat. They were experimenting with me and showing me, having me do things that they could monitor and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of value that came out of that. The biggest value was I was applying what they were discovering as a remote viewer. Others weren't because they weren't getting it. They weren't opening the packets. They weren't even looking at it. And that started causing some problems in the results. We started getting more collection requirements in the lab sometimes than they were. So there was something going on there that wasn't appropriate. Why, I don't know. I wasn't operating at that level. I was just a keep me blind kind of viewer, They didn't discuss those things with me.
What were some of those challenges besides, the training aspects and some of the stress to the people? Did you find anything that was sort of challenging for you? You seemed like this was a natural for you, a fit that, you were...
Everybody, that's what they say.
Yeah,
okay?
it just seems that way. You're so on top of it, Joe.
Well, no, I'm on top of it because I was paying attention to the science.
Right, okay.
I'm a technology kind of guy, okay? When I started out, we were using a thing called an ANPRD-1. I was into radio direction finding, okay? The ANPRD-1, you had to be within 1,000 yards of the targetable antenna, okay?
Yeah.
And 1,000 yards in Vietnam is damn close to getting your butt killed.
You're certainly within sniper range, right?
Yeah, you're just, if they find out you're in their AO, you're then being chased by dogs and everything else. And this ANPRD-1, they said, was man-portable. No way. The batteries weighed 60 pounds apiece. It took an entire team to carry it in. We left so many in place with thermites on it that it just wasn't practical. So I got involved with one of the Chief Warrant Officers who was trying to design new technology. And we were successful at that. We put new technology into fixed wing, we put it into helicopters, but it was still too heavy. So some of the helicopters were flying at half fuel loads. The guys getting on the helicopters, the operators were wearing shorts, Ho Chi Minh sandals with a 45 in their back belt and a t-shirt because it was so overweight. They could go out and fly for 2 hours maybe, but it was working. We had 3 choppers we inserted in Vietnam. Lost when the NVA figured out what we were doing, lost all 3 in like 2 weeks. I got hurt in a helicopter accident. I got blown out of it when it was hit with an RPG. That's a whole different thing. What I'm trying to get to here is I understand technology is an improvement. And technology as it's applied in combat is incredibly important. We had silly stuff where the agency would come and say, "Where are these boots?" And the boots had, on the soles, had human footprints that went the opposite direction of the way you were walking. Now, an idiot can see, walking in the muck over there, that where the pressure on the boot was, and tell that somebody was trying to walk backwards to fool you. We lost those boots somewhere in the jungle. I don't know what happened to them. Stuff like that. But on the other hand, we had things where we were trying to radio back information from the field, and we were using CW, continuous wave, Morse code in translation. And the problem with Morse code is you got to encrypt it. So we're using small one-page pads for encryption. They work great, but they were slow. It was cumbersome. You still had to get it back to the headquarters. So the agency supplied us with some things where you could just point it at an overhead aircraft and dump the whole information load in like seconds. That's technology.
They had that all the way back then? That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Kind of.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, there's some flaws to everything, but all technological improvements improve our ability to defend the country, to come back alive. So I learned that really early on in the military. Most people would say, well, that's not how we were trained. That's stupidity. That's people going, oh, I wish I had the old horse back. You know, when I joined the Army in '64, I was polishing saddles. We still had horses. and it's not something I enjoyed.
Well, you know, the guys that were selling the horses to the military, they can't give that up. They still have that around. That's why we still buy tanks.
No, I learned very early that technology is important. You pay attention to it. In remote viewing, they were doing silly things, like they were trying to improve where you did the remote viewing. A nice, quiet place, nothing around it. People weren't allowed to come in and out while it was like the perfect atmosphere for remote viewing. But you got to remember, we're in the Army. I'm a remote viewer. I know what I'm doing, and they're telling me, we can provide you with this perfect place anywhere in the world. No, they can't. If I'm asked to do a remote viewing and it's out of a foxhole somewhere, I got to know I can do that. So I want to be trained that way. So I did a lot of things that were complete opposite of what they wanted me to do. I refused to be in quiet places. I started losing that need. I did things that were where I was doing remote viewing off my desk, for instance. I was doing it like after I retired from the Army, while I cut grass or while I'm working in the shop. You do it when you can apply what you know about it technologically. It's the reason why when I got out of the Army and I wanted to start demonstrating remote viewing, you know, I've done 51 demonstrations live on national television in 7 countries. They all worked except for one. And I have them all on film, and No one else has ever done a demonstration live on national television.
Why don't you describe that for our viewers?
Okay.
Because I mean, everyone probably has their crazy views of something they might have saw on sci-fi or something like that.
Well, you can go on the internet and see all kinds of examples. But that's someone saying, I did this great remote viewing 2 weeks ago. I'm going to replicate it for film. Or I'm going to demonstrate remote viewing on film right now in my lab with all the people who are going to control it. Okay? All you got is their word for it. Ask them to go into a studio for like ABC, NBC, or something like that, and demonstrate remote viewing completely blind on a target that the studio has gone out of its way to prevent you having any access to. And what happens is they fold up like a deck of cards. And the reason why is they don't know how to disassociate from the surroundings and become a true remote viewer.
Okay, so I come to you and I'm having a problem. Just
Yeah.
sort of walk through like what information
Okay.
are you given? Then what do you do to your mind?
I'll give you an example. It's a battle you go through every time you do a remote viewing with your own mind for two reasons. One is the ego wants to run everything. If you allow the ego to participate in a remote viewing, you're dead on arrival. It just won't happen. Because the ego tries to take control and tries to tell you things that aren't right. Secondly, if you're going to do a remote viewing and you've been trained in it, you have to learn to understand what's remote viewing information versus what you're inventing. Okay? That's a hard process to learn. It took me years to get to some point where I could determine that. So I'm going to give you an example. I did an ABC special. It was a show where they brought me in, they explained that I was a remote viewer, they talked about what was going to happen, and they said, now we're going to put Joe in a sealed room where he has no idea what's going on. But before we do that, we're going to introduce him to this beautiful woman. They took her out of the audience and brought her up front. I met her, I shook her hand. They gave her money, a film crew, and a helicopter. And they said, she's going to go somewhere in the LA area, Joe. And while you're in the room, you're not going to know what's going on. When we bring you back out at the end of the show, you're going to do a remote viewing and tell us where she is. I said, great. I went in the room, I sat in a chair for 40-something minutes. She left, went with the entire film crew, a helicopter, and money, disappeared. So I'm in the room, I can't hear a thing, 45 minutes. They bring me out, and they have her on the phone, and she's saying, I'm where I need to be. And I said, great. I'm sitting there. They said, describe her location. Now here's the problem. When I came in the night before with my lovely wife and we were met by friends, it was late at night and most of the places you can grab a bite to eat were closed. So you know that spider-like restaurant, it's got LAX painted on the side of it? It's in LA, okay? Big spider-like building. It's right there, it's like right on the edge of one of the runways, I think. Anyway, they took us there.
I avoid LA, Joe. So
Yeah, I don't blame you. I do too.
As much as
but they
possible.
took us there. At 11 o'clock at night, we had a meal at the restaurant. So the whole time I'm sitting in the room, I'm getting pictures of the LAX restaurant. And I'm thinking, it's right across from the studio. When we got out of the car at the studio, it's like right there and the studio. So it's like 100 feet from each other, 100 yards from each other. So the whole time I'm in the room, I'm getting this message, LAX restaurant, LAX restaurant. And all I can think is, this is driving me crazy. I can't get it out of my head. I had dinner there last night. So I'm in the room. 45 minutes later, they bring me out. I'm sitting in a chair in front of a big white card with a magic marker. And they said, describe the place where this woman is. Now, she supposedly took off with a helicopter and everything. I couldn't get LAX restaurant out of my head, and then I remembered something I taught myself a long time ago, and that is you got to trust the system. When you become a remote viewer, there are certain things you need to pattern for, and you trust it. And it was impossible to get the LAX restaurant out of my head, so that's what I drew. And guess what? She didn't like helicopters. She walked across the open area and had a cup of coffee at the LAX restaurant. The whole place applauded. I mean, everything went crazy. These 2 feet are running behind this curtain. And I don't know what is this. We broke for a commercial, and this guy's running behind the curtain. He comes out from behind the curtain, and it's, can't remember his name now, the Israeli psychic. Anyway, he comes out, runs up on the stage, grabs my hand and says, "That's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my whole life," and then vanishes, goes back behind the curtain. It's like, wait a minute, isn't he a great psychic? You know?
Was he to test you or debunk you? What do you think?
No, he just wanted to shake my hand.
Okay.
It's like, and everybody thinks, oh, there must have been a trick. No, there's no trick.
Well, I mean, it would have been a trick on their part to have her go there when they led you to believe she was taken off in a helicopter, right?
But it was,
and that had to somehow taint you, right? And
it was totally her decision, and it doesn't matter. You got to understand, it doesn't matter to me. What I'm going to do is draw what comes in my head. I did a target, and it was for a program in Japan where they had a guy coming in from a business, and they said he's bringing a picture of his business, and I kept trying to draw it, and I had this like big walls of glass with some really nice high-speed cars parked in front, flags everywhere, and I got the sense that it was some kind of a motor raceway or something. I can't remember the exact name of it now, but I kept saying, this is like motor racetrack or something like that. And the guy showed up, and the first thing the guy who was asked is, "Did you come from a racetrack?" He said, "No." He said, "But I brought pictures of my business." And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I really messed this up. And he throws the pictures down. And what it is he owns this company where he sells cars in Japan, high-speed Lamborghinis, Mercedes, stuff like that. And what it says is Racetrack Auto. So I got everything but the auto at the last part of the name. And the picture I drew was one of the pictures he laid on the table. So you go with what you get. You have to trust the system, but getting there is a training system you have to do in your head. It's like you think differently about everything that I might think about. There aren't 2 people on the planet who think the same way. Everybody's got a cultural background, growing up background, different teachers, different influences on their lives. Everybody thinks differently about the same things. What's interesting is, in remote viewing, you have to figure out why you think the way you do. And you have to tear that apart and come to a way of understanding. The subconscious will give you information, but it will disguise it in some way. And what you have to figure out is, what do I use? What do I don't use? And many people who are extremely successful in life, or guys who are in combat that always come home, are people that use that information, and they don't think about it. They just know it's there. It comes to them. They use it. They don't question it. Police officers who walk beats at night. Firemen who know exactly when to get the hell out of a burning building before it collapses. And surgeons who make the right move in a surgical suite when all their training says, don't do this, and they do it anyway.
Yeah, I remember from the Sean Ryan interview when you were talking about how he was telling you how the operators, when they move through to clear a room and stuff, and they somehow just know that there's something off in the corner.
Oh, you stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when I as a non-operator, when you look at how the special forces, how they clear these rooms, and I don't know how they do it, how they can decide in that split second that it's an enemy, it's not an
Hey,
enemy, and to pull the trigger. I mean, just
I was
I never
in,
believed that. I've tried it, go on these
yeah,
ranges. It's just it seems beyond the capabilities.
I was in Pleiku, Central Vietnam, in 1968 with the Tet Offensive. I was there for four of the five biggest battles. 4th Armored Division, 1st Cav. I was in downtown Pleiku when they kicked it off. So I was across the street from where the NVA were dug in. It was a Catholic church. They had new foundation trenches. They were making an extension on the church. They were in those. Me and my partner are across the street because they'd just blown our Jeep to hell and back. We're in a Chinese pharmacy with a teak table that was probably this thick. Flipped over. We're behind the table just trying to stay alive. And they couldn't get an angle on us with RPGs or anything, but they took out the whole front of the building, nicking things. We're worried, what we were worried about is the 4th Division going to overrun us and burn us out before we can get out of here? But we got overrun so quick it wasn't funny. So we just joined the units that were going through the city. So doors are being kicked in through the whole city. This is everybody up on the line kicking doors in. You don't even want to talk to some of these guys after 25 minutes because every door you kick in could be the last door you ever saw. These guys are not even trained in that, and they're doing it. It's like, it's an amazing thing to see the coordination and the effects of people working together who have been properly trained. Remote viewing is the same way. It works exactly the same way. And so does a police officer who has to open the door or just knock on one. You'll see them go up to the door and they'll just step to the side and knock on it like this. And the next thing he gets 2 bullets through the door. They just, you know it. You just know it. And you use it. People who do that their whole lives are great remote viewers. People who don't, they don't understand.
This might be slightly off topic, but if let's say you were training, and I assume you would want to train, our special force operators would. This would be a very beneficial thing to have. Is there even sort of a sense of coordination? Like, can the unit operate almost like they're all seeing or feeling the same thing if people are all on the same tune? Or, I mean,
we did some experiments where there is a preliminary event that happens in the physiology of a human being just before an IED goes off. Okay, and the way it can be tested is really easy in a lab. What you do is you put headsets on a person and you let them listen to white noise. That. And in the middle of that, at some point, you go bang. And when that bang occurs, you see this in their physiology. And that's just 2 simple wires, one on this finger, one on this finger, going through a computer to a measuring device. So every time there's a surprise, bang. Well, what people don't realize is way out in front of that, 1.5 inches, 2 inches out in front, is a little tiny bump that's identical to the big one. Okay? That's a 1.5 second warning that something really big is going to invade your senses. And we all get that. Now, does it happen all the time? We don't know because we didn't have the money to do all the research on it. We just brought it up, and you know what? The military said, oh, that's nice, but if we train people to use it, that's another 2 weeks before they get into combat. So that's another, let's see, $1.2 million. No, we're not going to do it. In 1966 in Vietnam, they had a platoon of Marines that was trained by a guy named Robert Hand. He taught them how to use the back of their hand on something to sense whether or not it was booby-trapped. Okay? They did it in a mock village. It took him a month. He taught an entire platoon of Marines how to do that. Okay? They sent the entire platoon to Vietnam. They monitored them for the entire time they were there. They had a 40% or greater drop in wounded or dead from booby traps than any other Marine platoon. Okay? Did they continue that training? No. Cost too much. That's not, Marines are not about that. Marines are invade the village, find the weapons, find the ammo, and if we lose some, well, you know.
Let's talk about a couple other topics. For one of the things we haven't touched on is that, and I'm sure our viewers are going to want to know, is there a difference between women, biological women and men, in terms of the skills to do this, predisposition? Does anyone have an extra sense?
Actually, there's very little difference between men and women. Women are usually much more into the specific details of things. Their descriptions will be a little bit more detailed. Men in many cases can be as detailed as a woman. So it depends on the person. The differences are probably personality differences. The major difference between men and women is men try to find a way that it works and mimic that, where a woman may apply their own methodology to it. This woman we have that's extremely good, her name is Angela Ford. She was an analyst in the Pentagon for many years. Came over and was recruited by the program, and is now the only other remote viewer that went from the program into the science side, into the lab side. And what she does is she does a thing called automatic writing. Sometimes it's where she is just messing with a pen on a piece of paper, and while she's doing that, information comes to her. It's a different methodology. The protocol's the same. She's totally blind, just like anybody else. But what's interesting about her methodology to me is that what she's doing, I think, with the automatic writing stuff, is she's occupying her ego-driven mind with something to do so that the actual messages, the information can come across. And she does that very well. I mean, she's very good at it. And she's good enough that she gives readings and talks, gives advice to people who she's known for many, many years in Washington, D.C. So, I mean, she's very, very good. There are other women who I believe had different methodologies. I don't know much about them, but I do know that they were extremely good. In the very beginning, with the original 6 remote viewers, one of them was a captain, a naval captain, who was a woman. And she was every bit as good as anybody else, sometimes way better. I know she was better than me in the initial beginnings of the program. But we lost her because the boss had decided that women and enlisted people shouldn't be part of the program. So it was kind of his personality that drove her away. It was a great loss to us because she was very good. I mean, she was describing the location at Desert One during the attempted rescue of the hostages. She actually reported as it happened the explosion when they swung the tail boom of the helicopter into the refueling C-130. She immediately saw it happen. Said, "Oh, there's a big explosion. So many people wounded or killed." And that was phoned into the Situation Room at the White House at the time. And they got the information faster than they got it from Desert One. So, I mean, she was that good.
Well, that's actually a good segue. I was going to say we haven't got into a lot of the specific missions. I know you did over 300 some odd missions for the CIA, right?
No, not for the CIA. I probably did, I did about 160 responses, my understanding, responses for the agency. The rest I did for a multitude of different
Okay.
different
All right.
intelligence agencies.
But well over 300 in your,
Oh
over
yeah,
your career.
yeah, easily that.
So I want to talk about a couple of interesting ones that you and I talked about in the past. So why don't we start with, since you were there anyways, on the Iran hostage crisis. Let's finish that one up, and
It
then we'll
was the
talk
whole
about.
crew. All of us we were assigned to monitor the hostages in the way they were being kept. You know, where they were being held, how they were from a health standpoint, whether or not their health was deteriorating, how they were being treated, what kind of food they were being given, and at the same time we were describing the rooms in which they were being held, which was going to be later very important about which rooms they went to initially to get the hostages in the rescue attempt. One of the things that they had is they had a whole lot of people who had just left the embassy like 6 months prior or less. So they were able to take our remote viewings and look at the objects that we described hanging on the walls, the types of rugs on the floor, that kind of thing. They were able to use that to say, oh, I remember that. That was in that room. So they had the layout of the embassy so they would know where every hostage was being held and by whom, how they were armed, that kind of thing. At the same time, we were picking up on all kinds of bizarre stuff that didn't seem to fit. We were getting things like Hartley Trent, who I talked about before. He came in one morning and said, I spent the whole night looking at spiders in the trees of the courtyard. And I said, Hartley, what are you talking about? Spiders. And he said, well, I can see their webs. They're spider webs. And they're all over the trees in the courtyard. And so we put that as an addendum in one of the reports. Well, it turns out those spider webs were actually wires to claymores. They had claymore to every tree in the courtyard because they knew in the past, our special forces, when they flew in to try to rescue something, they would sometimes use a diversion by bringing a helicopter in deliberately, crashing it in a courtyard or something to draw attention while the actual raid was happening somewhere else. So all we could think is that they had armed the claymores in the trees. So I don't know if that had made a difference in the plan or not, but I can tell you if I was part of a unit that was going to be doing the distraction, I would want to know that the claymores were in the trees. Things like that. Missing vehicles. Vehicles were being stolen and hidden. Weapons were being assembled and hidden. Doorways. Some doorways they were actually making smaller. They were putting in cinder block walls in places. And it was all, I think, in preparation for the coming rescue attempt. It had to do. Oh, it had something to do with the large soccer field across the street or down the road a little bit. Things like that. And we didn't know what to do with it, so we made an addendum. Eventually, a couple of us were called into the Pentagon, and we were interrogated on what our source was. They thought somebody was leaking the information because our understanding was there was literally a dozen people in the world that knew that this was going to happen, this rescue attempt. People were training in the desert for it in America. They had no idea what they were training for. But the people who orchestrated the idea of a rescue thought we were getting information from one of those people, and they wanted to know who the leak was. So when I was called in and asked, I told them, I said, look, this is psychic information. And the guy interrogating me said, no, you're getting this from someone. I want to know who it is or you're not leaving. And I didn't know what to do. All I could do was tell him, okay, well, here's the problem. It is psychic information, and I could tell you some things about some problems specifically that you're having right now with your wife. Changed his whole mind. I walked out of the room after that. Now I know that man did not like me afterwards. And I stayed away from him. He stayed away from me. If we saw each other in the hallway, he would go the opposite direction. So I probably convinced him that psychic functioning is real, but I certainly didn't convince him that, of anything else. It just made him angry.
There's a little bit of just a sidebar to that story. As we talked at dinner last night, Joe and I were comparing war stories. Mine, not so much war, but my time in the military. But I had joined, Joe and I overlapped during the early 80s. I was in the early 80s. I joined specifically because or at least that was the story I told myself, was because of that Iron Ostrich debacle. But then, as I told you last night, I told you something I never told anyone in before, was I actually had like a premonition one night, and I joined the Air Force the very next day. I just had this weird, sensation, and then I got out of the blue. I just dropped my whole life, didn't tell anyone, didn't even give notice at work. I just went in and signed up, and then I told everybody, and they all like, "What are you, crazy?"
Crazy,
And I couldn't tell them why. So I think the story I sort of made up was, well, we're going to go to war anyway. I'd rather pick my job rather than get told where to go. And that was the story I've been telling myself for years. But I remember why I joined it. It had nothing really to do with that, although that would have been a good reason. I think I might have done it even without that. I might have thought about it a little longer than.
Well, you think about it. These are people that deliberately took over an American embassy.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I mean, that's nuts. And I'm surprised our response wasn't greater and more immediate. I understand the idea of you don't want to escalate something to a possible full-blown war, but to take over an American embassy, that would be like if we went into their country and took over their embassy somewhere. I mean, it's like, come on, this is a civil world, or it's supposed to be.
And I don't, I tend to try to stay out of the politics, but this topic is too ripe not to talk about. I remember, because you were in Vietnam, and I remember, I told you about the story about, we lost some people in town. I just missed the draft by a couple of months when I got out of high school. But I remember the sentiment of the country back then. It was horrific for the vets that came back. And I remember being, very, very upset about that. I was going sort of the hippie culture too. I mean, everyone. My sister was a big-time hippie, but that bothered me. It always bothered me. And I remember I voted for Carter because I thought he was the good guy. He's going to be the peanut farmer. He was the real guy. He was going to do good things for us. And then, he decimated the military, and I remember it was horrific. So when I went in, there was no GI Bill, there was no benefits. It was really, really bad, and the morale was horrific.
Went south in a hurry.
But Reagan had just gotten in, and literally within 2 years, it was different. Being in the military was okay again.
Yeah.
And that Iran thing sort of was that catalyst where people got shocked. Have we let ourselves become weak?
Fall to that point.
And Reagan came in right after that, and all of a sudden the military built up, and thank goodness we did. We were ready for the for all the Gulf Wars. We would never have been ready. Remember, we didn't have the right kits. We didn't have a jungle. We didn't have desert kits. We didn't have the desert Camrys. We had jungle Camrys and an Arctic kit.
Yeah.
We were going to go to Russia. We were going to go to Vietnam. Right? We only had two choices, and that changed the whole military. And thank goodness today, we're talking, 20, almost 25 years later, people actually, for the first time, I got thanked for my service. And I said, "What are you thanking me for? I didn't go to Vietnam.
No.
I wasn't in the Gulf War." But it was shocking to me that people actually say that to you now. And I said, "Look, you can't thank me. I thank the people that actually went." But it's nice that you think about it. But people are saying that now. They really don't mean it, though, I don't think. It's become sort of a virtue signaling, that,
It's like an automatic phrase.
It's like you have to say it.
Yeah. People don't join the military because they want to be thanked.
No.
They join the military because they feel obligated to give the country something in exchange for what the country's giving them. And in my opinion, I think that feeling is non-existent now. We have people who have been born and raised in America who have enormous amounts of wealth, who have never paid a dime of taxes, have never done anything for the country except take money and power from it, and there's no recompense. It's like no, it's like it's owed to them in some way. They won't even walk on the same sidewalk with other people. They fly from their helicopter from the top of the building where their suite is to the airports and travel wherever they want to go. And it's an aggravation to me that everybody, I think, should be willing to at least give something to the country. And the fact that you volunteered for whatever reason is important. And that's always been important, especially when we went to the volunteer military. But today, they can't fill recruitment.
I was just going to say, so how wonderful it was. We had the draft. Everyone was totally negative after Vietnam. And then for the next 25 years, we had a completely voluntary military.
That's correct.
And fought 2 or 3, I don't know how many really wars, 20 years of fighting.
That's right.
And yet people still joined.
Yeah. And the reason they did is because we were, because of terrorism, international terrorism, we were dealing with being targeted by a lot of people. And they understood that if that military wasn't strong, we could be victimized by just about anybody. Especially after 9/11. I mean, that was crazy. I know lots of people who just immediately went down and signed up. Where was that desire prior to 9/11? And now there's just nothing but well, not nothing, but you go on the internet and there's all this conspiracy stuff about, well, the government was complicit in 9/11.
Yeah, I mean,
it's ridiculous stuff.
Tough to stomach, yeah.
And people believe what they read. People believe what they hear. They don't even know how to find real news in America anymore. They just accept it because that happens to be what they bought into. And, that particular political side or this particular religious side or this neighborhood or whatever. But they've stopped having open minds. They've stopped paying attention to what we need to have in order to continue being the richest, most powerful country on the planet that can say, whoa, stop, no war here. We have to economically control things. We have to help our allies when they're in trouble. The whole reason we haven't had full-blown world war is because NATO was created in one side and Russia had their satellite countries on the other. And things worked out the way they worked out, but it's like it's all falling apart now. It's like everybody's going, it's their fault, not mine. It's his fault, not mine. No, it's every American's fault because we're not taking our portion of responsibility and acting on it. Everybody needs to do something for this country. That doesn't mean degrade or destroy or eradicate the other political party or each other because we have different viewpoints. What that means is that we come together and decide what the majority wants. Now, it isn't about, well, I have the power, I'm going to exercise it on you. No, it's about what's the majority of the American people, what do they want? And how do we get that? How do we sit down and negotiate for that? This whole idea that one party knows what they want only and they're going to force feed it to Americans is wrong. And that's both sides of the house. That's not just one side.
No, there's no more negotiation. I mean, if you look back even 20 years, Tip O'Neill and so.
Oh yeah, they were
negotiated.
Great men.
They negotiated. They were completely different sides of the fence, but they definitely know who to negotiate
They're great
things.
men. They understand the values and the basis for the strength of this democracy. It's going away, and we don't have any control over that.
And the presidents did make law. There's a really big change. I don't know if people realize this, that presidents now are making law through executive orders.
Right.
The rise of that has changed.
Should never have
happened, and it's gotten worse and worse. And every president does more than the last guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got really the tyranny of a person that wasn't supposed to have any legislative power.
Exactly.
The executive branch doesn't have power. He's supposed to enforce the laws, but of course now they're not doing that either.
No, because
the one job that the president has, right?
Exactly.
We could spend a lot on this topic, and I want to.
Yeah.
But I want to make one other point on this because it's really for some of hopefully some of our younger viewers out there. For me, I think and I don't want to be misogynist or sexist or whatever, but every young kid, 18 years old, they could benefit from 2 years in the military. It should be mandatory. It's the best thing I ever did. It changed my life.
Even if it's not the military, doing something overseas.
A government service of some
type. So
type.
they can understand the value of the very country they're coming from.
You get a job skill, you get training, you get treated like an adult, you get respect, you get merit-based promotions. All of that was so different. And what it really does, and it's what people probably don't realize, and I'll say this, and I'll have to get my fact checker on some of this because some of it's mostly anecdotal, but the military is the best thing for poor people. Almost everybody in the enlisted ranks is poor.
You're right.
I went on my first airplane. We didn't have a car. My first plane ride was the basic training.
Yeah.
First time I left the state.
Yeah.
You know, I met people from all over the country. Talk about getting rid of racism. When they shave your head,
not everybody.
They dress you from green to here to here. Yeah. All you have is this. You're just a little slightly different shade.
Yeah.
And you're all treated the same. And we had the tough kids from every neighborhood in the country who came in, talking tough. And believe me, that tough
doesn't last very long.
Not after the first night when they come in banging the garbage cans and roust you out of your bunk, and they start to teach you how to be a man.
Well, they build character.
And it's really something that I can't thank the military enough, and it got me out of poverty. And the other thing that I've never thought about this until just today, but this is something I want to do some research on. If 70% of African American men are not at home with their children, that was not the case in the military. They're very family oriented.
Absolutely.
It promotes you being. They make it easy to have children. You have a child care, you have housing, you have all the food and clothing. It's all relatively inexpensive, and it's encouraged, and you get paid more. If you're married, versus in welfare, you get paid less, right?
Yeah, I got to interject something here, though. 30%, around 30%. I don't know the exact figure right now because I knew it before I lost track of it. About 30% of the military in the lower ranks are on food stamps.
Now?
And why is that? Right now.
Oh, my gosh, that never would have happened.
Right now. So, at the lower ranks, they're not getting paid what they need to be paid to take care of their families. So many of them, their wives work. They work second jobs when they're not on active duty.
We did that too, but not food stamps. We had enough.
Yeah, well, yeah. I did.
Well, I guess maybe it's the food prices have gone up so much, right? Because I think we even at the base exchange, right? You're not paying the taxes, but you're not getting any cheaper than the food costs are, right?
It never gets any cheaper.
And gasoline is gasoline. You don't even get a break on that.
That's right.
I did not know. I got to look into that. That is a crime that should be fixed immediately.
And I'll tell you something else. If you're not of a certain rank, it's very hard to get into quarters because there's not enough quarters.
Of course, right.
On-base quarters. So a lot of these young families are in trailers.
I lived in a trailer.
Yeah.
I actually didn't mind. I had a bunch of guys living in a trailer.
Sure. I
would not want to have my family in a trailer. A bunch of single guys, it's fine.
It's different.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do. And it's not degrading to them. It's their home. But we need to do something to improve the life of the lower ranks. That would help considerably. But a lot of people don't know that. It's like there's an assumption that because people have the Veterans Administration, that the VA is helping them.
I don't want to get it. That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole different topic.
You get
But
medical
I'm
care from them.
recommending-
I don't go anymore because they almost killed me when I did my second surgery.
You need to do a whole show on that.
The VA needs to be, the hospital part at the minimum needs to be abolished. And you should just get regular health care.
A card,
get my VA
you can
card,
walk
go to
into any hospital in America
Absolutely.
and get treatment, and the federal government takes care of it. You're right.
It'll be cheaper than keeping those hospitals that are a nightmare. My sister's a PhD nurse, and she went to work for the VA hospital in New York, and she had to quit. She couldn't take it.
Yeah.
She couldn't provide care.
Yeah.
She was so demoralized.
Yeah.
You know, and I warned her. I said, Sharon, you're not gonna believe what you see. You know,
it's tough.
And at some stage where a guy has to drive 150 miles to go to the VA hospital to get his prescription filled, they won't even do it over the telephone.
Hey, I'm one of those guys.
Okay, see, I couldn't even imagine that.
Three different hospitals, all their intersecting circles, and I'm in that little piece where none of them intersect.
Well, we are definitely going to do some more on that because I think this is something that the public isn't aware of.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumption there.
Yeah.
It's like there's an assumption that because someone becomes a politician, they're a crook.
Yeah.
I think that's wrong. There are a lot of good people trying to run the country with an honesty and an understanding for what needs to be done, but we generalize things. You know, I'm guilty of that. I'll say, oh yeah, and all these people do this. No, it's never all those people. It's always a portion of them that bring bad light onto something. And right now, we're dealing with that with our two parties who can't seem to sit down and communicate because everything that they're saying to one another has to do with, well, all of you guys and all of those guys. But I don't want to get into politics because
we'll do another one, Joe, because I tell you some good things to talk about. And one of the things that, you know, the amount of money we just sent to Ukraine and Israel, we could have solved the VA problem.
Possibly,
right away.
Unless they build a whole bunch of new buildings.
No, we shouldn't be doing new buildings. I mean, I would just give them the cards. I mean, the extra cost of let's say we put them all on a Medicare type situation, it would be better. And we're giving it away to people who are in the country not legally. They're getting health care. You know, and I work with, and I know you probably aware of it, I work with a bunch of veterans organizations as kind of my passion for my philanthropy is that they're trying to do it themselves. They're trying to create like all these things to help people coming back with PSD, and all this. And it's tragic that the very guys that need the help have to go out and provide the help to themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
And with the suicide rates, and it's tragic. Okay, well that's a whole other topic.
A whole other topic.
We'll do that one because it's an important one, and I have that on the agenda. But let's finish up. Let's talk about, because I think people will be excited to hear some of these more exciting missions that you were on. Let's talk about maybe the Russian submarine, the MX missile, and and let's start with the agent that you tracked. I think that's a really good story.
We had an agency that came to us and asked us, this is when I'm working for Stanford Research Institute. Actually, it was Science Applications International Corporation, that's AIC. They closed the lab at Stanford and moved it to Science Applications International Corporation. So we're working there. Dr. May and I are working together there. And they came around this agency and said, can you track a spy? And we said, yeah, we think we can do that. So they said, okay, we're gonna keep everybody blind, even in your lab. So what we're gonna give you as targeting material is the Social Security number of the agent. That's all. Now, Social Security number, we don't know what the age is, male, female, nothing. What we're gonna do, Joe, is we're gonna notify you 3 times over the next year. We might call you at 1 in the morning. We might call you at 12 noon. We don't know. But when we call you, we want you to describe where that agent is. The first time they called was 1 in the morning or 12:30, something. It was around midnight. And I was visiting with a psychologist that lives in San Francisco. And at the time, he was renovating a big Victorian house. He woke me up middle of the night, and he said, "You got a phone call. I don't know who it is." And I went down to the kitchen. I answered the phone, and the guy says, "Describe where the agent is." That's all he said, and he hung up. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I did some sketches. Actually, I did one sketch. I did rolling hills. I put in towers, which happened to have the big propellers on them, rotating, and I put in dotted lines interconnecting all the towers. And I said, this is some kind of electrical grid. It's a wind generating area. And he's parked at the base of the center antenna in a rental car. And in fact, that's exactly where he was. He was in Altoona Pass in California, parked in the center of that entire wind generating area. The only thing I didn't get credit for is I didn't give them the color of the rental car. That's where I blew it. Okay? Everything else I said was absolutely correct. They went away with that, very pleased. A little while went by, and then I got targeted a second time. The second time was a way more difficult target because I tried to draw it maybe 8 times. I could not do it. It was so complicated. I wound up with this thing that looked like an eyeball on a stick with all kinds of wires coming out of it and everything. And I said, look, it's too complicated. I can't draw it. It's too big. It's too complex. What it is, it's an accelerator. And I just wrote that out on the page. He's standing inside an accelerator. In fact, he was standing in the Stanford accelerating room at the delivery end of the machine. And if you've ever seen a picture of the equipment in that room, you'd understand why. It could never be drawn, okay? So they weren't pleased with that because I didn't give them enough detail. I just said he's in an accelerator.
I would think that would be perfect detail.
Yeah, I would think so too. But
you named the location. How much more? And how many accelerators are out there? Yeah, I mean, okay.
So,
because you'd have to take a schematic and interpolate that into an accelerator. That'd be a lot harder,
well,
right?
if you have a choice of 9 locations, or if you got a choice of 100 locations, and only one of them's an accelerator,
or at least you could even say, okay, it's not something super tech complicated. You could look at those and see.
Yeah, you could even
is it a power plant? Is a nuclear facility? Yeah, you would not look at a supermarket.
Right. So, the third target was more interesting. When they asked me to describe that, I think it was 12 noon or something, middle of the day, and what I got was a T-shaped building. I said it was 7 stories. I put a big A on the building when I drew it. I said it's referred to as Building A. He's on the top floor in the intersection of the T in front of a huge glass window. So I'm going to tell you it's the director's office. It was midnight. That's right, it was midnight because he was there when nobody else was there. I said he's in this T-shaped building. His top floor is the director's office. He's got his feet crossed up on the director's desk, and he's smoking one of the director's cigars, which is a Cuban cigar, which at the time was illegal.
Illegal, right?
So I said, well, can you give us more detail on where this is? So I drew this entire lab facility with all kinds of parking and fences and barbed wire, and I put in a split road with trees down both sides. I drew this entire complex, and I said there's an entry gate on this corner, and down that road about 30 miles is the city. Anybody that looks at my drawing automatically says the following: oh, that's the west gate of Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. That's where they build atomic weapons. Everybody who's ever seen it says that when they see my drawing. Is anything correct on my drawing? The T-shaped building. That's it. He was actually sitting in the director's office, top floor, dead center of the T, looking out the picture window at Lawrence Livermore Laboratories.
So, as part of remote view, you actually were seeing what sort of honed in on what that person's seeing?
No.
Is that how it works?
Just reporting on where he is.
Where he is, okay.
Yeah. So they said, okay, you did really well, but he's building something. We need to know what the heck he's building. So I put him in the desert. I said he's building something that's hidden in a van. So there's actually 2 vans. The delivery part of it's in one van. The supply system is in the other van. I drew what was apparently a microwave output. I put the delivery end of the microwave on there, and everything I said about frequency was absolutely correct, but I said it in high frequency. I didn't know it was a microwave. I said it's 2 point something, and in fact it was a 2-inch microwave antenna. All the figures were right, but it was just in a different label. I said he was targeting electronic equipment out in front of this thing, a distance of X feet, and it was at a 60-degree angle, and he was frying the equipment from distance. And in fact, that's exactly what he's doing. He even had the angle right.
Oh, wow.
So, in the midst of all this, I reported also on the solar experimental station down the road. I said there's a field with 300 mirrors. They're all computer controlled. They break up into pieces. Everything's tuned to focus on the top of a tower, and it's shaped like this. And I drew drawings to show that. And on the top of the tower, they initiate what I would call a miniature sun. They create an actual ball of material from the focusing of all the sunlight on that one spot. And they asked me, well, we don't understand the difference. Why one thing and why this thing? And I said, well, the solar facility is kind of his hobby. That's what he does. When he's not working on his system, he goes there because it's his hobby. They came back immediately and said, our spy has no hobbies. That's all they said. He has no hobbies. Okay, well, my feedback was, we're going to reward you with actually showing you what you drew. So Ed and I are in a car. We're going out into the desert to see what he's building. En route, we came over a hill and stopped. They had lowered a bar on the road because they're testing this solar facility off on the left in the distance. And at the time they were testing it, you could smell ozone in the air. There's a miniature sun appearing on the top of the tower. It was really unbelievable. Ed's sitting next to me. He's telling the driver, he says, I wish I had a bag to put over Joe's head because he should have never seen this. We're interested in what's going on down the end of the road. So we head on down the road finally. When they finish the experiment, they raise the bar. We're going down the road. And there's this dust cloud coming down the road from the solar facility. Right. And this car turns onto our road in front of us, so we're in the midst of a dust cloud following this car. He pulls in at 2 big vans sitting there, tractor trailer vans with equipment inside of them. And I get to see basically what I drew. Now I have pictures of what he built next to my sketches. All of those pictures and the transcript of what I said about it were all turned over to an independent agency. They came back and said, this is what it is, this is what it does, and we can replicate it off the remote viewing information.
Wow.
Guess what the guy said when we were talking to him? We were standing there talking to him, and Ed says, was that you coming from the solar facility? And he said, yeah, it's kind of my hobby. I go there for lunch. His exact words.
My hobby. Yeah.
Kind of my hobby. Okay.
That's amazing.
Now, what occurred as a result of that? They gave us $500,000 for research, and we never heard from them again. They never came back, never asked for anything. I think it was, God, we have to forget that ever happened. That's what I think was going on there.
What about the Russian sub? That's really good stuff.
Russian sub, at the time, it was one of the first targets we had. They came to us on it because this was a building that was so big that you could put like almost the entire Mall of Americas in Minneapolis inside this building, and it was huge. The roof was up in the air. It was anyway monster building. When we didn't know that because they had a picture of this building sitting out away from the harbor. It was a quarter mile or something. I don't even know, but it wasn't connected to the harbor, and they had railroad tracks coming in and going out, and they had been taking material in there for 3 or 4 years and building something in there that was under heavy guard. It was obviously a very classified area. When I say we, it's a pregnant we. There wasn't an intelligence agency in America that could buy a picture of the inside. They were offering literally millions of dollars for what was going on inside that building. Not one person came forward. It was that tough a target. It kept moving up through the intelligence system. It finally got to the National Security Council.
Okay.
Got to the National Security Council, which is headed up by the Vice President. It has representatives from all the intelligence agencies there. It was like their primary target. The guy in charge of analyzing the materials coming in on this building was a guy named Robert Gates. At the time, he was the top officer for the entire Russian floor at Langley. Okay. The Admiral Jake Stewart, who I had known from before, I had done other targets for him, came to the unit and said, I want number one to work on this. Well, it wasn't just me. Hartley Trent, a number of other people worked on it. Hartley and I came up with the same concept. What we both said was, we think they're building a new submarine in that building. Didn't make any sense because it wasn't connected to the harbor. Hartley continued, it's a submarine. I started adding lots of information. I started talking about the use of high energy lasers for doing welding, all kinds of new techniques and materials going into the building of this submarine.
So you were remote viewing into the building?
Right, I was inside the building talking about how it was supported, the superstructure, the height of this thing. I said, this is the biggest submarine I've ever seen in my life. And one of my monitors said, who is also blind to the target, by the way, the monitor said, well, how big is it? And I said, it's over 60 feet wide. It's 30 feet shy of the length of a Soviet aircraft carrier. That's how big it is. That's huge. The other things I said, it had slanted missile tubes, which is a gross improvement over any submarine the Soviets had at the time. Because slanting the missile tubes means they can be launched while it's moving. It doesn't have to stop, which makes it very vulnerable. There was all kinds of other things I said about, which I can't go into. Lots of details. It turns out that Jake Stewart thought that this was really, really important stuff. So he took it to the National Security Council, the whole report, my sketches, transcript, everything. National Security Council sent it back. Had a note on top from Robert Gates. What it said was, total fantasy, RG. So he showed me this. So I'm sitting there, and he says, this is really pissing you off, isn't it? I said, no, it's not making me angry. He says, no, I know it is, because I can see this red line going up your neck, So he says, what do you want me to do? He said, I can't, they won't take it. I said, take it back. Tell them the fantasy will be launched in 112 days. And that came out of nowhere, just like popped in my head. So I told him that. I said, take it back. They're going to launch it in 112 days. So he went back with it to the National Security Council, but on the way he stopped at the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO at the Navy Yard, and had it targeted for 114 days out. Now what happened is when those pictures came back, there was a channel cut from the building to the harbor. And sitting in the harbor tied up to a Soviet aircraft carrier was the largest submarine in the world, the TK-089, the prototype for the type, what we titled the Typhoon class submarine. It had all the same launch tubes. I was off the launch tubes by 2. I said it had 23, I think, and it had 25 launch tubes. There's a lot of things about it that we were able to collect from overhead because it was being loaded with the control rods for the twin reactors, all that kind of stuff. It disappeared 4 days later. No one ever saw it again. 8 more of those were built in another place. No one ever saw or heard of them. They were in the water against its offensive weapons against America. They never would have known about any of them. They could have stood off of New York by 100 miles and eradicated every major city in America in 17 minutes, 19 minutes. We could have done nothing. Had that remote viewing not taken place, we never would have known about them. Today, only the TK-089 still exists. They took the others that they had built. They were not prototypes, they were copies. And they did not seal them well enough. So they had radiation leaks on a lot of these subs. They tried to get by with a cheaper sub, I guess.
Yeah, that's...
So, only the TK-089 exists today. Now, I went to Russia with Ed after the wall came down in Berlin and everything changed. It was a time when I think President Yeltsin was in charge, and the actual admiral that was running their psychic unit told me, he says, if you come back here, Joe, with a 3-man film crew, I'll arrange a 5-day cruise on that for you. You'll be the only Westerner ever on that ship. Would I do that? Hell yeah. While Putin's alive, never going to happen. Okay?
Good way to catch all the guys he wants to eliminate.
Yeah. So.
Don't drink on the boat. All right, let's do at least one more. Let's do, you take your pick. Well, we talked about Iran. We talked about the age of, well, it's the only ones left that I had on my list was the MX missile.
MX missile program. That's an interesting one because they came out with this idea that they could build these identical boxcars, railroad cars, and they maybe 1 out of every 15 or 20 would actually have an ICBM launcher inside of it, okay? But they'd all be identical, right down to the serial numbers. And they would install all new kinds of dead-end railway lines and things. And every now and then they would shift them all around. And only we would know which one had an actual launcher in it. That way, there could not be, we could defend against, eradicating our weapons systems. Sounds like a great idea. Stanford Research Institute, who's been studying conscious interaction with machines and everything else, as well as Princeton University, who was doing lots of studies of interaction between humans and machines, said, wait a minute, we think we can defeat that system. They came back, I think it was Senator Cohen came back and said, if you can do that, let's set something up that can demonstrate it. So that system was set up to demonstrate whether or not you could determine randomly which of 10, let's say, storage sites actually had a nuclear weapon in it. And so that was run a lot. And over the course of a year, we demonstrated that better than 99% of the time, we could tell where the nuclear weapon was being stored. It killed the MX missile program. There's actually, I can produce a letter from Senator Cohen thanking the lab at SRI for saving the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars by doing something so ridiculous it wouldn't work. Now, did that earn us any favors? No. The Air Force was going to get the managerial system for all of those missiles, the building of that system, which would have been a lot of money. And the Air Force, as a result of losing that program, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force put a letter out saying, no contact with the people in this unit, that meaning the remote viewing unit. Your children won't play with their children. Your officers won't know their officers. You won't eat dinner together. You won't do anything. It basically was an order to stay completely away from us, which they did for about 2.5 years. Never got anything from the Air Force after that, till he retired. When he retired, we got inundated with requirements from the Air Force. So,
Yeah.
did it happen as a result of killing the MX missile program? Well, I'd like to think it did. I could be wrong. You know, I'm making assumptions here too.
Yeah, but that's a big coincidence.
Yeah, it's a big coincidence. It's a no-brainer when you fold in the letter from Senator Cohen thanking us for killing it.
All right, I want to shift over because we would be neglectful not to talk about the Monroe Institute.
Oh, good.
I think that's probably near and dear to your heart.
Yes, it is. I've been associated with the Monroe Institute now for 40 years. It's an important place in my life. It's important to development of consciousness and how we understand it. The way that Monroe Institute looks at things, the way they say it is, we are more than our physical body. A lot of people don't believe that. A lot of people think what you see is all we are. No, we have energy and power in ways that we do not even understand. I started going to the Institute because I was having trouble prepping myself to do a remote viewing. Under the stresses I was under, it was taking me longer and longer to empty my head to do another remote viewing. When I'm doing 3 to 4 a day, it was more and more difficult. So I started going there, and at the time, all they had was what they call a gateway program. I call it the mule. The gateway program is probably the most important program they have at the Institute. I started going there and taking gateways. I took a number of gateways in order to mellow out in my remote viewing, which it did. I'd go back to Fort Meade and I'd be like a new person. And even the boss said, wow, that's incredible. You go to the gateway, you come back, and you're a better remote viewer than when you left. So, over a course of time, people started asking me, didn't you say you were having out-of-bodies at one time because of your near-death experience? And I said, yeah, I had this near-death experience in 1970. As a result, I would every now and then have a spontaneous separation from my body. It was interesting to me, but it didn't have the kinds of access that I'm up for. Remote viewing, I can turn that on and turn it off. Out of body was spontaneous. So somebody said, well, don't they study that stuff at the Monroe Institute? I said, yes. So my boss went to the Institute and met with Robert Monroe, who was the director of the Institute. He was the sort of the brains behind the entire Institute. In meeting Robert Monroe, they asked him if they felt he could train me to control my out-of-bodies. And he said yes. So the Department of Defense actually hired him to train me in controlling my out-of-bodies. So I started going for long weekends to the Institute. Thursday night, when I finished my last remote viewing, I would pile into a car and take off for the Institute. I get there in the late evening of Thursday. Friday morning, Saturday, Sunday, I would spend almost all day in the lab with Robert Monroe. Very early on Monday morning, around 4 o'clock, I would get in the car and go back to Fort Meade and do remote viewing. So I'm working on this stuff like 24/7. In my time with Robert Monroe in the lab, he did eventually teach me how to generate a separation from my body under controls. I was tested on that one time. I was given a target. It was a picture of a building somewhere in the world. It's very difficult doing a controlled out of body. It took probably 7 of them, I can't even remember now, a lot of them to find the building. Because I'm out there flying around looking for the building. I don't even know what country it's in. I eventually found the building. My orders were go to the 2nd or 3rd floor, I can't remember now. Pass through the vault door, which you will find there. It's like a big vault door. And in the southwest corner or northwest corner or whatever of this lab is a table, and there's an object on it. And what we want you to do is figure out what the object is, what it does, how it's made. Come back, wake yourself up, and give us a drawing of that, which I did. And I drew it. I pushed my face into it when I got into the lab. I actually passed through the vault door, which is a weird feeling in the out-of-body state. You can actually feel the molecular interchange when you pass through a vault door. I'm in the whatever corner of the lab it was. I pushed my face into this object. I'm checking it out. I came back, woke myself up, went into my drafting table, and drew it in detail to scale. Now, I don't know what it is or what it does, but I'm labeling stuff in there. Okay. When I had it all drawn, I rolled it up, put it in a tube, and mailed it to the client, DOD. They came back, a couple people, and it was like 10 days later. They came back and they said, visited me at my home. Now, this is with my second wife. Visited me at my home, and they said, we need to know where you took high energy physics. And I said, I didn't. Okay. Who do you know that's a high energy physicist? And I said, the physicist I spend all my time with is a Dr. Edwin May. He's not a high energy physicist, he's a low energy physicist. Okay. What libraries do you check your books out in? And I'm beginning to think, they don't believe what's going on here. So I gave them a permission letter to go to the library that I used on base and another library in Washington. I guess they checked all that out. They came back about, I guess a month later, and took all the pads, everything that I could have printed through when I drew this object. And I had to sign non-disclosure agreements on ever drawing it again or producing it in any way, shape, or fashion or talking about it with anybody else. Did we see him again? No. Never came back, never asked me to do another target. And they decided it was just too much stuff had to be done to get to a target in the out-of-body condition. Now, there's differences. In the out-of-body condition, you get this very exact response if you can find it. The other problem is if somebody says to you later, who made it? You can't tell them because you haven't gotten the information through remote viewing. If you want to go back and target it through remote viewing, you can't because you know about the target now. So you just be inventing things. So it creates a huge problem. Now, if you target it with remote viewing, you may get less information, but if somebody says who made it, you can give them almost a good description of the person who actually assembled it. You can tell him he has 2 kids, one going to this college, one going to that college. One of them wants to quit school because he wants to work on motorcycles, and the other one wants to become a banker. Everything's interconnected in remote viewing by a single line of connection. So everything in the world you can get to one way or the other using remote viewing. You can't do that in the out-of-body condition. But if you want an exact description, you can, if you can find it. Now, there's a lot of distractions in the out-of-body state. If I separate and I'm leaving the room my body's in, and there's a chandelier with 175 pieces of brilliantly shined and polished crystal, and I pass through it, it's a distraction. I just went, oh, wow, I've never seen this. And you could spend an hour in that chandelier and never get anywhere. That's one of the problems. Second problem is, on first separation, you get a sense that there's something very primitive out there that is a threat, that's scary. You don't want to ever meet it. And that happened to me like it happens to everybody. And I said to Bob Monroe, I said, what is it that I don't want to meet? What's that scary thing out there? And he said, hey, you figure it out. Didn't tell me. He said, you're going to have to address it. I kept asking him. He said, well, that's up to you. You're going to have to figure it out. I finally figured it out. I rolled over one day to see what it was, looking over my shoulder. It was my physical presence. We are very primitive in our physical way. We're very higher level in our energy way or spiritual way, or however you want to look at it.
Wow.
So all that fear went away. Now, I've had a lot of very interesting experiences spontaneously in the out-of-body shape, but I've met entities, I've seen things, I put my finger into rivers of energy that gave me massive amounts of information. I mean, a lot of strange things. And I did a lot of that with Bob Monroe in his lab. I even targeted Mars once, a million years BC, which is interesting because I went and got the negatives from JPL of my targets, had them blown up, and there's some fascinating things that I was actually targeting. So.
Wow, that's good stuff. All right, so I promise not to keep you too long. Let's just wrap up with a couple things. One is I want to give you an opportunity to tell us something that I neglected to ask you, or something that you would want to get out, even despite all your books and all your interviews. As time goes on, new things happen. Like in my experience, what I'm trying to do, even with what I'm doing, is that when I think back about what I believed 50 years ago to what I believe today, it changes.
Oh, yeah.
So I may have said something 50 years ago, based on my beliefs 50 years ago, that I might want to review and say something different today because my beliefs are different. And that's why I hate it when people pull up quotes from somebody 20 years. Who cares? That's a quote that what you believed 20 years ago. It may not be what you believe today.
Right.
And they always try to take that and it's a zinger, 20 years ago. By the way, if you're static throughout your lifetime, that's an issue.
You're dead in the water.
That's an issue. If you're still saying what you said 50 years ago on beliefs based on knowledge you had at the time, you haven't learned anything. So I'm a firm believer in people being able to revise their earlier thoughts. So I'm going to give you a chance to do that, but I just wanted to take one sort of hot button. I wouldn't say hot button, but it's something that's in the zeitgeist today is AI, quantum physics, UFOs. All of this somehow does cross your domain. Can you maybe just give me a little synthesis on what you think that is, where it's going, what remote viewing is going to be there? Because a lot of people are concerned, at least they've told me they're concerned with, the human side versus this AI intelligence, and what are we missing? And then come back and just tell me something you want to tell.
We'll go to AI first.
Yeah.
We don't have a clue what AI is going to do, other than AI we know has some superior ability to tell us things about processes and things that we want to do in a better way or in a different way that we would never consider, okay? Which is supposed to be making us smarter, more advanced, It may like provide an encryption system that we've never possibly even imagined that could never be broken by anybody. I mean, it could be almost anything could come out of this. We could build a machine that would get us from here to Mars overnight and not have it happen over months and months. Okay, we don't know what AI is going to do, but it's going to invade our science. It's going to invade our thought processes. It's going to invade everything, and basically provide us with things that we would never consider that maybe will push us progressively into the future. What's scary about it is that's turning over a lot of power to computers, to AI systems that A, could be lying to us because we won't know. B, could be steering us into areas we should never enter. One would be weapon of mass destruction, some chemical you get on your skin, you're dead. Or your DNA changes and you no longer are survivable. I mean, there's so many things that could happen. We don't know a thing about it, but we're leaping right into it, just like the human species does when we have a great idea. Let's do it. Should we be doing it? We don't even know, but we're doing it anyway. It could end up being the thing that terminates human life. We don't know. The secondary problem has to do with the changes that would occur. Let's look at a single change in physics, and I use this as an example. America, at the end of the Civil War, let's say 1865, we were a covered wagon society. 1865 to 1945. That's not a long period, but we developed everything from electricity to you name it in that period of time with very little fundamental change in physics. The single huge discovery in physics eradicated 2 cities of people in Japan in 1945. That's the atomic weapon. It's out of control now. We have no control over it. Everybody wants it because it represents power over other human beings. That's insane. And yet we used it. Now, let's jump to aliens. What if that they're real? Now, I'm going to tell you 2 things. One is, I and my partner in the Bahamas in 1966 had an experience with a UFO. We had watched 2 full-length movies in downrange trackings. We were downrange on Eleuthera in the Bahamas. It was a tracking station for Cape Canaveral. So we had all this telemetry, all this stuff there. I was there in the Army for a specific reason, and so was he, but we worked in pairs. We went to a double feature that night, outdoor theater. We went to a bar, had a few beers, and we're taking a shortcut to our quarters down on the Atlantic Ocean. So we're going through these sand dunes, and the whole place lit up like daylight. I mean, this is 1 a.m. It was as bright as it would be at 12 noon. And of course, we both looked up to see where the light was coming from. At the same time, all our hearing went away. We couldn't hear crickets anymore, frogs. We couldn't hear a thing. It was like being in a cone of silence. Mm-hmm. And it was this cone of light coming out of the belly of a UFO, slowly rotating above our heads. You could see panel lines in it and everything else. Probably over 200 feet across. The whole event lasted about 6 seconds. Gone. It shot away so fast you couldn't see it leave, or it folded out of reality. I can't tell you which it did. We looked at each other, turned around, went back to the bar, had 2 more beers, and discussed it, and decided we don't want to tell anybody about this because everybody's going to Vietnam. We're in the Bahamas, you know? We're on this island, fishing and diving and doing all this stuff. I don't want to go to Vietnam. So we made a pact. We're not going to discuss it with anybody. We got to our quarters at night, crash and burn. Next morning, 7 o'clock, I wake up. I am sick. I don't feel well. I go down the corridor to his apartment to see if he's okay, my buddy. The door's open. I knocked on the door across the hall from him, and this guy answered, and I said, "Where's my buddy Steve?" And he said, "Oh, man, he went out of here at like 4:30 in the morning. He was so sick." "Really? What happened?" "Well, they sent him to the hospital in Homestead, Florida." My buddy came back a number of weeks later. He said, "We went to help somebody with a red truck or something, and I took the cap off the radiator and it blew up in my face and I got burned." And I said, "Oh, really? Well, there's no red trucks on the island, pal. So how did that happen?" "Well, I'm telling you, that's what happened." So I said, "Okay, where were we before?" "Can't remember." "What movies did we watch?" "Can't remember." "How many beers did we have?" "Can't remember." Nothing else there in his memory, just the red truck that he took the cap off the radiator. Will he ever remember? Probably not. I don't know. But he was burned really badly by this light. Okay, that's one UFO story. Did it actually happen? I don't know. Maybe they put something in my drink. I don't know. I don't care. It's like I wanted to forget about the whole thing. Flash forward to now. We're capturing Tic Tacs on gun radar. There's lots of pilots coming forward now who are being finally believed in what they're seeing. Are there entities out there? I still don't know. I do know there is UFOs. It's absolutely true. That's happening. Are they manned by an entity? I still don't know. However, if they are, why are they here? And why do they have this excessive interest in our nuclear facilities and our rockets in the ground? Why is it that the Russians are dealing with that? We're dealing with that. Almost anybody with an ICBM is dealing with that. It must be important to them. Flash back to one discovery in physics that eradicated 2 cities because we could. Not because we should, but because we could. And you got to think that maybe another discovery in physics might be, I don't know, something small like we live in a multi-dimensional world. You can change dimensions and jump from star to star instantaneously. What if that's possible? What if that happens tomorrow? Do you think we'd be a threat to other entities that don't want to see us out of control with nuclear weapons jumping star to star? Possibly. That's the kind of thing that scares me about physics, discoveries in science, and leaping in with both feet and not even thinking about it. Because we can do this, make lots of money with it. We can have lots more power with it. We can rule the planet with it. That's insanity. That's not sane thought. That's not understanding what our responsibilities are to the planet and to other people in the world. It's crazy. We don't see it as crazy. Crazy is using this, remote viewing.
I want to go to one thing we talked about last night before I let you do your wrap it up with something you want to tell us. First, by the way, I agree with that. Our expansion of physics. I mean, we already know, or we don't know, but we have theoretical models, and math has been proven that we can do interdimensionality, multiverse, and all that. Einstein, cracked that open quite some time ago, and Oppenheimer, a lot of people that were involved decided maybe this was not a good thing that we learned this. Maybe we were not supposed to learn it. Maybe we just found the Pandora's box that we shouldn't have found. It makes, that's a rational way to think about this. That now we're threatening maybe the entire galaxy or the universe because we could be blowing holes in the time continuum, right?
We could be destroying our future.
So it wouldn't be surprising that it's a higher form. It's sort of like if you're, and I hate to use this analogy, but it is sort of apropos. If you become a pest, what do? We call the exterminator. We get rid of the pests.
Right,
So maybe
exactly.
we become a pest now, and if we have become a pest, other people are going to come along and they may not view us as the same level as them, so they don't even view us
We
as.
may be the new stink bug of the universe.
There you go.
Yeah.
So let's. I want to just remember what we talked about last night. It was something that was really. This really stuck with me. I haven't been able to sort of get this out of my head since we talked about. We talked about the afterlife. This is pretty cool. And I'll paraphrase it my way. You'll make it better, but sort of simply a sum of the total of what you did during your life and how you affected other people, all the other people. And so, therefore, if you live a moral and sort of ethical life, your heaven will be the you now join and get you get back what you put in essentially from all of those people that were affected by you, and that's sort of heaven. And you'll refine that thought, but then hell being the opposite, being if you were a bad actor, a Mao, a Stalin, a Hitler, and you killed all these people, your hell is now to have to go and reap the benefit, the repercussions of that with all those people that you killed, and that would be quite hellish. So when you think about those, people don't think of that it's really, although the Bible and other religions, they do try to say your actions matter, you're going to be judged on your actions, but I don't think they framed it in the way that you have. So you want to take a little bit of that before we go into your...
I'm gonna do this fairly quickly, but if you got any questions, you can ask them when I'm through. Here's how I arrived at that. It became understandable to me that everything I do in life has an effect. And it's either a good effect, a bad effect, or it's neutral. But whatever it is, that effect I get to enjoy, okay? So if I do something really great and I make a lot of money and I'm really happy and everybody around me is happy, that's great. But is it a true effect in terms of how it affects the world in which I live? I don't know the answer to that. Because I know if I do A and B and cause C, I don't know how many people that affects or what their perceptions are. I only know my own. I only get the experience that I enjoy. I wouldn't even know anybody else in the room with me what they're seeing or how they're feeling. So I think what happens is when we cease to exist in this reality, in other words, we die, we enjoy physical death. I don't think we lose our identity because in my 2 or 3 very serious near-death experiences, I didn't lose my identity, but I became different. And in that difference, what I came to understand was that parts of me are in almost everybody I've ever interacted with in my life. That's good people, bad people, enemies, non-enemies, friends, everybody. So when I cease to exist, this world that is a total illusion is gone. It's just completely gone. So we get these ideas in our heads that if I die and my wife went ahead of me and I really loved her a lot, she's waiting on me. Or if I die and she's still alive, I can wait for her. You know, people you really care about, you think that way. That's an assumption. I think if this is an illusion and it all disappears, what we find out is the person that's waiting on us or the person we're waiting on is already part of us. We disappear out of this reality, we appear in that reality. We have done nothing but change our clothes, okay? Yet, there has to be some extended value of having been here. That extended value is we get to understand from all our actions what was good and what was bad as perceived by the parts of us that we interacted with, which was family members, enemies, friends, everybody that we had connection to in this reality. It's in that fullest understanding for what the results were that we learn. We learn about more about who and what we are as an entity, which is extremely important, especially if we're created in the image of, okay? How many times do you hear that? Yeah. Every religion on the planet, we're created in the image of the Creator himself, herself, itself, whatever that is. Could be an algorithm, who cares? Mm-hmm. But we're created in that image. So we now have a fuller understanding for who and what we are as part of that entity. And the assumption is all that understanding gives a better understanding to the entity itself on what it is, okay? If you can understand that it's a value that it's the only value you can carry with you when you die, it becomes rewarding, neutral, or the worst thing you ever could experience. In the value side, you are now trying to live a moral, ethical, right life. So when this all goes away and you have the understanding from all the other interactions that you've had, you come to the conclusion that, well, yeah, there were a lot of things there that weren't right. But there's way more that were right. And so you feel, understanding-wise, you feel better about who and what you are. Or you have a neutrality about it. It's, well, it was a lot of good and a lot of bad. Maybe I need to do this again to try to get a better feel for who and what I am. But there's a downside to it, too. If you're Mao Zedong and you murdered 60 million people for power, and you find out how they feel about it after you're gone, that's hell. And you have to learn to deal with it, or you're going to come back a lot of times trying to understand why that was the wrong thing to do in order to understand the greater parts of who and what you are. That's my view of death. That's my view of what happens when you're no longer here. So it behooves the average person to try to understand that the true payoff, the actual thing that happens, is not in the illusion, it's in the aftermath. Okay. So if you don't lead an ethical, moral life, you're going to be repeating a lot of stuff a lot of times. I would prefer trying to do the right thing and just leaving here with a clear conscience. I've always told, when people say, how do you make judgments when you don't have enough information? If I can put my head on the pillow at night and close my eyes and know that I did not deliberately harm something, that's of value, okay? That's how I make my decisions. So we're sitting here talking. I'm giving you responses that are coming from my heart. This is what I believe. Now, like you said earlier, I'm subject to change in the next 3 to 5 minutes because I'm not stupid enough to think that I know all the answers. I don't know a thing. I can assume things, but I cannot know them. So until I have ground truth, hey, it's the best I can do. But I will be subject to change because as I grow and I become more informed, it becomes more important to me what I do.
I think that's important. But one of the things I hope you'll agree on this, but maybe not. But the one thing that I don't think should change or doesn't change much or shouldn't change much is your principles and your morals. Those sort of should be consistent across.
They're rock hard.
That's the one thing I don't see have changed.
They're reinforced.
I haven't changed them, you know?
They're reinforced. Yeah. If anything, you become more specific about them. They become more important to you. They become issues for which you will stand tall in your boots and take whatever comes from it.
And provided the better, in your decision making, for me, it's provided the better guideposts.
That's right.
And then the one thing I try to teach my friends and my children is that because this is the one thing that stuck out to me in sort of my assessment of what are my principles, what are my values. The main thing I always thought, and I thought this before it became something that I had to face in reality. That's when you really know something.
Yeah.
Is that your principles, and this is sort of my thought. I'm sure somebody must have wrote it. Maybe they did. I don't know if it's original or not. But in my view, principles only matter, Joe, when it's inconvenient.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have to make the decision.
You now have to do something that you said you were principled about, and it's going to cost you something.
Absolutely.
And potentially something dearly. That
It
happened
has
to me.
to be.
And people said, John, why don't you give in?
It has to be that hard decision.
Yeah.
If it's not worth it. And that hard decision is going to be everything from life or death all the way down to how I treat somebody, in the moment. It's all of that's very important, but it becomes more important and more critical as we gain more and more knowledge about why we're here or why we should be doing that. I've always thought that I have absolutely no answers at all, except for me, because of my understanding. Where I started seriously considering these things was at the Monroe Institute.
Wow.
That's why it's an important thing.
That's why
I recommend you go there for a gateway.
I've already committed.
Yeah.
I've been given that message by almost everyone I've met that knows you, and
It's incredible.
And they're talking life changing.
Absolutely life changing.
And these are like serious people that you don't expect to say that.
Yeah.
People that tough dudes that I wouldn't expect to be emotional about.
Like
something.
that.
To even admit something like that.
Yeah.
These are hard dudes, and it's amazing how that's the first thing they want to talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so let me give you the end. I think we've been here a while. My back's hurting. I'm sure your back's hurting. These cushy couches are not made for us. But what would you like to tell the next generation of something that you would like to just on your own? Okay.
Here's what I consider to be extremely important about this whole area that we've been discussing. Consciousness is important. It is so important that everybody avoids addressing it. I mean, it's because it holds a mirror up to us, okay? We don't know a lot about it. In the remote viewing, we don't know enough. There's times when it just doesn't work. We don't know why. There's information that comes to us that is extremely valuable. We don't know why we get it or how it gets to us. We don't know how our brain works. We don't know how the mind interfaces with the brain. We don't know anything. We think we do because, like I said, we have all this information from the 1.8 million words of science on remote viewing, but we don't know enough about it. Nobody wants to spend money on that because they don't see value in it. They don't see where's the profit, okay? Where do I get my payoff now so that I can enjoy the house on the mountain or overlooking the river or the bay? Where do I get that? Well, you get it out of a better understanding for what it is to be human, and you get the payoff by how you help humanity at large, by peace, by intelligent interaction, by new discoveries. It's a way of knowing, coming to know what's the right thing to do, not just do something because you can. It's a slower way to get to the mountain, but you're taking everything with you. You're taking everybody with you to the top of the mountain. I don't want to be at the top of the mountain and have everything I ever wanted because I won't be happy there. I'm happy where I help thousands of people, millions of people. It's why I keep writing. It's why I keep talking and doing demonstrations on television. I want people to know they're more than their physical body. They are spiritual beings, they're powerful beings, and they can change the world. But they don't even realize it.
You're going to help them, but hopefully this will get out to some people. I'm certainly going to be telling people about you and this, because there is a lot of depression,
Oh, yeah.
sadness,
Yeah.
disassociation with reality. People are struggling, but they should look back to themselves rather than to this exterior world that they're trying to find their happiness in, and they're not going to get it. So, Joe, let me say thank you. I want to say meeting you and really, actually, I think meeting your wife, Scooter, was actually even more impressive. But
Yeah.
we'll have to get her.
Works for me.
I can see how you keep going, because she is a force of nature, and you guys make one of the greatest teams I've ever seen. We're definitely going to keep in touch as long as I'm able to walk and talk. I'm going to try to spread the word. This is an important thing for me. I started this with that as my goal. I hope it resonates with people. I hope we can reach people. And we'll keep in touch. So I just want to thank you again, and we'll maybe probably if you have the patience and the time, we'll sit down and talk about some other topics.
Some other things, yeah. Sure, anytime.
All right, thanks, Joe.